Emotionally immature and toxic people. That's what we're going to be talking about here today on the It Be What It Be podcast, right over here. And there are a couple of videos that I have that I want to be able to talk about today in our content reactions. So here we are, we're back, and I want to just jump straight into it as fast as I more or less possibly can. Of course, we have here the It Be What It Be podcast and trying to keep up with the content creation while also having a new job. So I'm grateful for that. Managed to get a job in 2025. I'm working on an idea for shorts. It's been a while since I've done some shorts, but I'm working on an idea for that. That being said, though, as I was saying, that there are a couple of videos that I definitely did want to share. And so the first one is going to be about the signs of an emotionally immature adult. So I am going to throw that in and see if that works right away.
Aging is biological.
There we go. And yes, that is visible for the gang to see. For sure, yes. And I'm also just going to put this one over here. So essentially, what I really want to be able to showcase with this video is to talk about people who are emotionally immature, essentially, obviously. That's going to be the first one. And then the next one's going to be about toxic people and some of the traits that would contribute to that toxicity. And I have quite a bit to say about that. So, getting started.
But aging is biological, but growth is by choice. As the great writer Maya Angelou once said, I am convinced that most people do not grow up. I think what we do is mostly grow old. Emotional maturity often has nothing to do with age. We've all seen 25-year-olds who have the character and composure of someone twice their age. And we've also seen people in their 40s who are still emotional infants. Different things lead to different outcomes in the way we grow up, but that's not what this video is about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, in terms of, I really like that. And in terms of what the lady had said, that most people, well, everybody grows old, but not necessarily everyone grows up, right? And I definitely would be in a lot of agreement with that. I definitely do think that there are a number of people who don't mature. I would even go as far as to say that maturity is actually not it is not causate. It does not have a causal relationship in relation to age. That age doesn't cause maturity, but there could be a correlation for sure, for sure. And at the same time, that I don't really like to make the compare. I don't like to say acting like a child. I don't like to say acting like a child because I actually consider that to be very disrespectful to children in the sense that a child is not necessarily less mature than an adult, right? So, with that being said, I definitely do acknowledge that there are a lot of people who, if not most, who grow old but don't grow up.
The signs of emotional immaturity can be very obvious, but tricky. It's tricky because the most emotionally immature people will rarely admit to themselves that they are emotionally immature. That said, here are the major signs you'll notice in adults who haven't attained emotional maturity. 1.
And I totally agree with that as well. It's almost like if you don't know, you don't know kind of deal, basically.
They have a very fragile ego. Have you ever been in an argument with someone who just kept arguing blindly because they couldn't handle losing? It takes emotional maturity to argue constructively. Mature people can step back in an argument and admit defeat when they see they have the wrong point of view. This is what it means to be a grown-up.
Now, even just on that, the whole idea about someone's just like arguing for the sake of arguing, I've definitely ran into people who are like that. there are a number of different people who essentially, and I have seen it on Charisma on Command as well as with Mark Manson. And essentially, it's that pointing out the flaw in the logic in the other person cannot necessarily persuade the other person. If anything, it can make them more rigid. It can make them perceive as though, oh, you attacked me. And so then that makes them more rigid in their position and less willing to actually change their mind, because most people tend to come down to, they tend to determine their positions as a byproduct of identity or tribe. And so then therefore it is about their personality, their ego, if you will, or their tribe. You attacked me, you attacked my tribe, you attacked my team, or what have you. This is where there's this whole notion of some people being willing to have their friends back even if they're in the wrong. Now I suppose it depends on what type of wrong that that friend would have done, and whether or not that really crosses a fundamental value of the individual themselves. But the amount of times that I've heard, oh, my friend's in a fight, I'm going to start like throwing fists and then asking questions later, for example, or just, yeah, I'm going to have your side, I'm going to have your back, and it doesn't actually matter necessarily about like what is right or wrong. Now I do think that there's also some people who try to manipulate logic to try to get their way, and what it is that like they're not actually trying to do what is the most logically sound way. They're not trying to pursue the most logically sound way of trying to solve a problem or try to handle a situation. They're just trying to do whatever it is that they believe in. And then there's an ignorance, there's an arrogance there, but then there's also an ignorance there as well, which you'll see coming up later on here, but also in with toxic people. So yeah, so some people, I've even noticed that there's some people who they would say that they have a particular position or that they don't have an issue with a particular position. And then later on, because of the fragility of their ego and because of someone else saying that they don't like a characteristic that they embody, maybe not like directly, but just in general, then they all of a sudden now argue, and they would now all of a sudden take issue with the position that they didn't take issue with in the first place. So to give you a more concrete example, say for example, one person wants to have children, another person doesn't want to have children. If that person says they don't want to have children because they want to move out of their parents' place, they want to become financially stable, for example, then that person then tends to say, well, you know what? Like living a life without children would be a meaningless life, and being like 70 years old and not having kids, like that would be an L. You know, where it be, even though they initially didn't actually have an issue with someone not having children, but they felt attacked or their ego was too fragile for that other thought to exist, that they retaliated. As I like to say, it be what it be.
Have you seen kids lose in sports or a debate? They just cry because they can't handle not winning. This is what you do when you don't know how to process your emotions. However, when you're emotionally mature, you should understand that it's okay not to win. You don't lose your ability to be rational simply because your ego is being threatened. You're aware that you can be wrong sometimes, and that's okay. As the author Eckhart Tolle wisely said, ego implies unawareness. Awareness and ego cannot coexist. 2.
I think that that's pretty interesting that ego implies unawareness, and unawareness and ego cannot exist. I've also heard that there's a few different people. I've heard that there is the ego, the id, and the super ego, for example. There's also people saying that someone has a massive ego. I've seen a lot of this in the Solved podcast from Mark Manson, to credit that. in particular in terms of procrastination, where they did just a bunch of looking into the history of procrastination, and it went into identity as well, essentially. That really, really simplifies it, but for the sake of getting the point across. Yeah, then it ended up just being all about emotions at the end of the day. So I think that that's pretty funny, but nonetheless, that there are just when they talk about children, for example, like I said, there's definitely going to be people who don't know how to process their emotions. Losing, I don't know that that's always okay. I do think that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself. I do think so. Other than that, but it also depends. Sometimes just walk away. Like you don't necessarily need to prove your point. And I also actually had that Instagram profile that I was showing also as well, which I could actually try to take a look for. Yes, and I see it right here yet again. And so it was the one about being not wanting to necessarily clap back, and like if someone is, here we go, share this tab instead. If someone is tempted to clap back, then this is some of what one can remember. Their opinion of you doesn't change your truth. Some people don't want clarity, they want chaos. Silence isn't weakness, it's maturity, restraint, and self respect. I don't always believe that. I don't always agree with that, that silence isn't weakness. I think it depends on the situation. Sometimes I do believe it to be necessary to speak up. You're allowed to outgrow the need to prove yourself. Protecting your peace is more important than proving your point. Peace feels better than being right. Your energy is sacred. Spend it wisely. Yeah, there's a lot of protecting your peace. I think it depends as well. Sometimes it is necessary to prove one's point. And I also, yeah, I also do think that silence isn't weakening, because also then someone else who just wants to continuously talk and have that raging bastard energy, you know, I wouldn't say that they are strong either, but nonetheless.
They have a high sense of entitlement. When you were in high school, you probably didn't bother about how your parents paid for your school fees or got you presents for your birthday. All you knew was that you had parents and it was their duty to make you happy. But when you grow up, you realize that the world doesn't revolve around you. You start to see
I wouldn't necessarily say their parents, it's a parent's duty to make someone happy or a kid happy. To take care of a kid, for sure. It's a duty to take care of them, but I mean, sometimes not making them happy would be eat your green vegetables, and no, you don't get to have sour Skittles. you know? Anywho.
some aspects of life that you didn't pay attention to as a child. For instance, you'll start to see that your parents also have needs and that life doesn't revolve around you. Everyone has a life. And if they choose to create time for you, you should be grateful. If they don't,
I did also think that it was pretty interesting in terms of when I was younger, then thinking, oh, the teacher actually is like a real person with her own life, her or his own life. So I did think that that was pretty interesting.
well, no one owes you anything. As author Roy Bennett put it, you stop complaining and making excuses in your life. You realize everything that happens in life is a result of the previous choice you've made and start making new choices to change your life.
Now, I don't agree that everything. So you stop complaining and making excuses in your life. Well, I would argue that there's more that's out of one's control than it is in one's control. So y- one does not get to choose where they were born. I even like how I saw a video of Mark Manson recently that was talking about that life is a video game, and that essentially in a video game you can choose what your avatar is. You may be able to choose your sex, you may be able to choose your different properties about yourself. However, especially say in a fighting game, you get to choose who the person is, but in real life, that's chosen for you. So whether or not it's your skin color, your height, where you're from, where you're born, a lot of that is chosen for you. There's more of other people than there are of you, and you can only control what it is that you can control, which is yourself. You can't control other people. Therefore, there's more that is outside of your control than what is in your control in that regard as well, on top of like where it is that you are, and where you're born, who your parents are, who your siblings are in your family, what your opportunities are. And there's so much else that's outside of your control, such as having to rely on somebody else to hire you for a job, right? Look at what's happening in Western countries right now. The elements are outside of one's control. So I don't necessarily think that it's necessarily so clear cut like that. That being said, I do think that there is an ability to be able to control a decent amount. Maybe not a decent amount, but there is a certain degree of control that one can have and that one is able to exercise. So walking away from situations, for example, what it is that you one puts into their own body, provided that you have enough money to actually even afford your lifestyle. So there's that too. So, and etc. So on and so forth.
3. They can't take responsibility for their mistakes. Have you seen people who suddenly become defensive when you try to point out something they did wrong? Being in a relationship with them is hell. Try to correct them and they'll bring up a counterfault of your own. They don't know how to process the fact that they are not perfect. Sometimes people like
Yeah, I really found that to be very annoying that some people are essentially, it's essentially as though it is necessary to treat them as if they are infallible because they're either too sensitive or they perceive the disagreement or even the feedback as an attack, and then they try to point out a counterfault of your own or even a perceived counterfault. You're not married yet, you know and so you don't have kids. So in some cases the counterfault is a perceived one, but even if it wasn't, it's as if like that's not the goal of the situation. And even in some cases it could just be that a person is just going about their day, they're just expressing what their opinions are on a matter, and someone else is just so disturbed by that, or they, such as say for example, I wanted to move out and to be able to have like a better job before having kids, whether whereas there's someone else who's living at home, and so they still want to be able to have that family, but then you're talking about their situation, and so then they perceive that as an attack, and then they try to point out a counter fault of your own or a perceived one, but nonetheless. So
these are your colleagues at work. They may not act out because it's a perfect. Sometimes people like these are your colleagues at work. They may not act out because it's a work environment, but the mere fact that you had the effrontery to confront them, or worse, tell the boss about a mistake they made, will turn you into a lifelong enemy of theirs. Sure, it hurts to be wrong, but it's the way you handle it that shows your level of emotional maturity.
I agree with that as well. And I think that that can be very devastating, that it could even be your boss, some of the people that you work with. All of this could be people that you work with. As I say, the four different pillars or categories of relationship would be family, colleagues, significant others, and friends, right? Those are four different ones that generally, four different categories that generally exist. So,
Emotionally immature people, as psychologist Dr. Tracy Hutchinson explained, are unable to deal with reality, and as such, they tend to alter their perceptions of reality to fit their own needs. An emotionally mature adult
I like that. Emotionally immature people are unable to deal with reality, and as such, they tend to alter their perceptions of reality. It's almost like a cognitive dissonance that then allows them to create a narrative that they are comfortable with, which I think is absolutely absurd and absolutely ridiculous. But as I say, you know, it be what it be. So, yeah. Really, I don't like it, but nonetheless.
understands that he or she isn't perfect. We all make mistakes, and the mistakes we make don't define us. We simply learn from them and we move on. 4.
But I also do think that there's a lot of pressure not to make mistakes. So, oh, whoops. Okay, I'll replay that one.
An emotionally mature adult understands that he or she isn't perfect. We all make mistakes, and the mistakes we make don't define us. We simply learn from them and we move on. 4. They can't.
So, yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of pressure for people to appear like a know-it-all because people tend generally people tend to want to know it all, like they want the confidence in general, and so then that can inflate it at the highest level, that can turn into a know-it-all. And then there's a number of social media know-it-alls who, oh, I'm going to be doing consulting, for example, and then so I have to have the answer to every single question that you may have to ask in every single situation that you're going through. I have to have all of the answers. I am the know-it-all kind of presentation. And that is typically, as I was saying, what audiences generally want. And so I generally think that what audiences want is stupid because someone doesn't know it all. And so what they're rewarding, I think, is really silly. But it be what it be. you know so then what I'm trying to get at is that then they want to be right, or even if someone has a disagreement, then somebody can be so petty, they want to see you fail, and so then that adds more pressure for you to be right. The arguably the best revenge is having a good life, because then it's to show that those people who walked away from you, who bet against you, it's to show that they effectively were wrong for betting against you, or that they missed out on an opportunity with you. Anyways.
Can't handle their emotions. The defining trait of an emotionally mature person is how well they can handle their emotions. For instance, when a guy approaches a lady and gets rejected, how does he take it? When a lady receives an honest but negative comment about her attitude from a guy, how does she take it? When a friend says no to favor from you, how do you feel? When your parents refuse to hand over money to you like they always do, how do you take it? As psychologist Joyce Marter explained, the way you handle these moments of intense emotions says a lot about your level of emotional maturity. And emotionally
Yeah, and I like that a lot as well.
emotions says a lot about your level of emotion.
I like that a lot as well, and I went over that last week, or not last week, but in the last live stream when I was talking about conflict ish. That someone, you don't have to like someone to treat them with respect, essentially, and that don't let your emotions get the best of you, because at that point, like, if one's emotions get the best of them, then it's as if they're ruled and enslaved by their emotions, as opposed to the other way around. It's very undisciplined, and I think that it's very unsavory, frankly. Although people do have their limits, everyone does.
Emotional maturity. An emotionally immature person will quickly have an emotional outrage when things don't go their way, and sometimes they'll resolve to blame others just to shield their perfect but fragile narrative of themselves. Just to shield their don't go their way, and sometimes they'll resolve to blame others just to shield their perfect but fragile narrative of themselves.
They'll go to blame others just to shield
The
a
narcissist.
fragile, oops, their perfect but fragile image of themselves. Yes, and I did have this on playlists.
Why do I sabotage everything that I truly want?
It's all due to something called law of sustainment. In psychology, the law of sustainment, if you're in the right...
Aging is biological.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna deal with that, but I just wanted to, A, there's that, but B, there's also to take a quick look at conflict-ish. Let's take a quick look at conflict-ish yet again. because there's certainly quite a bit here. Now he's trying to talk about a bit more content that has to do with leaders, but yes, you don't have to like people to treat them well.
You don't have to like people to treat them decently. But too many people think that respect is something you only give to people you like. But you don't have to like someone to be civil. You don't have to be friends to be friendly. You don't have to approve of someone to treat them with basic human decency. You know, life will put you in rooms with people you don't enjoy. You'll work with them, negotiate with them, and sometimes even depend on them. And if your ability to be
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now we're definitely talking about like life in general, but also just I would say that this would apply to any type of relationship, frankly. So
considerate and composed is tied to your personal feelings, then you're not in control. Your emotions are. Because I'm going to tell you, I don't like many people I meet. I don't like their character. Our views don't align. They would never be in my inner circle. And you know what? Many people don't like me either. But we don't have to like each other to be likable. I can still present myself as approachable, relatable, and trustworthy. Not for them, but for me.
I also he's about to say that like kindness is strategy, and sure, to an extent I do think so, because yeah, being mad and say going and making a angry LinkedIn post because someone got fired or laid off from their job or they experienced a toxic job, that can affect one's reputation. And typically then when being asked in another job interview, why did you leave your last job or what have you, it can be a test of someone's professionalism and their emotional maturity. If they're going to badmouth their last boss, then that can be perceived as difficult to the new hiring team, and they wouldn't want to necessarily hire someone who's willing to badmouth their previous employer. And some people would even go as far as to say, would you want someone who would potentially badmouth you?
Because listen, our reputation will outlast every temporary annoyance. And how we handle difficult people speaks volumes about our character, not theirs. Maturity is your ability to separate personal preference from personal conduct. It means understanding that kindness isn't a favor, it is a strategy, not to manipulate, but to navigate. When difficulty comes, your character is not determined by how you feel about someone. It will be determined by how you treat them.
So he talks about character among other factors and talking about strategy. So I do think to an extent that that is important, but at the same time, I also just think that it is it depends on the situation for sure, and like it's kind of very easy for me to say that at this point, but that essentially part of it just really has to do with. I think it depends if how aggressive the other person is being, for sure. I think that that's certainly a factor. I do think that, for as I was saying, don't do the LinkedIn post or in that scenario, because then that could be bad for the reputation. Other people who don't know what's going on and know why it was that you may be acting a particular way, even if you were right. There's that
The
too.
narcissist.
So there's quite a bit. There's quite a few different reasons, but now we are going to be going on to every toxic personality type explained in 3 minutes. There is 8 of them, and this is just also has a relationship with the emotional immaturity as well.
They crave admiration, lack empathy, and manipulate others to maintain their fragile ego. Everything revolves around them, and if you dare challenge their superiority, expect gaslighting, guilt-tripping, or outright hostility. They have an exaggerated sense of self-importance and will do anything to ensure they remain the center of attention, even if it means exploiting those around them. The manipulator.
Yeah. So definitely had to deal with like the fragile ego over there, and you can expect gaslighting if someone was to challenge them, for sure. Yeah.
Manipulators twist reality to serve their agenda. They guilt-trip, deceive, and subtly pressure you into doing what they want. Whether it's a friend, partner, or coworker, their tactics leave you second-guessing yourself while they stay in control. They excel at playing mind games, often using charm or emotional appeals to get what they want while making you feel like you owe them something. The victim.
Yeah. Yeah, the manipulator definitely can certainly happen in a number of different situations. Parents can be like that, like, "Oh, you are meant to take care of me when we're older," among other factors. And I certainly have had my last boss was a very toxic boss. I can't believe I ran into that person, and that this person is like this is incredible. Like, and being in a small business as well, there's no HR. It's essentially just him and his business partners. So, and then if there really is ever a conflict, then oh, like I have my business partners to have my side and what have you, and very much throwing tantrums when not getting what it is that he wanted. But anyways,
The perpetual victim plays the blame game. Nothing is ever their fault, and they thrive on pity. Their problems are always worse than yours, and if you try to set boundaries, you'll be labeled heartless. They refuse to take responsibility for their actions and use guilt as a weapon to make others feel obligated to cater to their needs. The control freak.
yep, definitely would have had some of that as well. So I definitely do know that some people can, yeah, they never take responsibility for anything that it is that they've done. Absolutely never doing that. And so as a byproduct of that, it's like they're either trying to blame it on the other person, blame it on you, for example, and then yeah, trying to guilt trip essentially into doing what they and a lot of these can really overlap as well, and one person can have multiple characteristics. So
Control freaks suffocate you with their need for dominance. They dictate how you should think, act, and even feel. The moment you resist their control, expect passive aggression, anger, or manipulation. They often believe their way is the only right way, dismissing others' opinions and pushing their own agenda onto everyone around them. The energy vampire.
yep, so definitely like dismissing other opinions and putting and thinking that their way is the only right way, that it's the best way, it's the way that everybody has to operate, and all of that. Certainly, yeah, it just brings back some very memories that I'm very much so not fond of, right? So, and I've ran into this with a lot of different people. Their need for dominance, they want to control the dynamic, very toxic, very much so.
Energy vampires drain the life out of you with their endless negativity. Conversations with them feel exhausting because they thrive on drama, complaints, and emotional dumping without ever reciprocating support. They leave you feeling drained and depleted as they take but never give, making every interaction one-sided and emotionally exhausting. The competitor.
If it's going to be about like yeah, leaving every interaction one-sided and emotionally exhausting, sure. I do think that there's also some people are not necessarily toxic if they're depressed. They're not necessarily like a manipulative, entitled narcissist, right? They're if they're just depressed, that's not really the same. So I I do think that there are some people who use their problems to try to manipulate, and then that could be kind of like the manipulator. Let's see what we have here. It could be kind of like the manipulator, or kind of like the victim, the victim or the manipulator for sure. And then yeah, and that can also be in a way narcissistic because it's only their problems and not yours, for sure.
For the competitor, everything is a competition, and they must always win. Whether it's career success, relationships, or even minor achievements, they'll undermine your victories just to feel superior. They compare themselves to others constantly and struggle to be genuinely happy for anyone else's success. If they can't win, they'll downplay your achievements or shift the goalposts to keep the competition going. The two-faced person.
Yeah, I had a friend that was like that. That was like I was moving into my new apartment. I was getting a bunch of furniture, and then all of a sudden, it's as if I'm in this competition that I never asked for because I'm happy that I'm getting furniture for my apartment. Crazy. Yeah, they're not genuinely happy for someone else's accomplishments. Yeah, moving the goalpost. Oh, it was about moving out. Well, now that's not going to be happening anymore. You know, it's just so ridiculous to even if there's a disagreement, that a disagreement is always a competition about who's right. Absurd, and then it ends up being arguing about everything. Every single disagreement becomes an argument, becomes a fight. That's the perception of some of these people, and some like it's just it is ridiculous that they have these characteristics.
Person. The two-faced person pretends to be your friend but secretly enjoys spreading rumors and backstabbing. Their loyalty shifts depending on who benefits them most. They may flatter you in person but talk negatively about you when you're not around, often playing both sides to avoid confrontation while stirring up drama. The drama magnet.
Yeah, so essentially just yeah, they're being disingenuous in that regard for sure. For sure. Yeah.
Drama magnets live for chaos. They create
Live for chaos. Ha.
unnecessary problems, escalate conflicts, and stir up trouble for attention. If there's no drama, they'll manufacture it. They exaggerate situations to make themselves the center of attention, often pitting people against each other just to watch the chaos unfold. The pathological liar.
That person like the drama magnet, like definitely escalating situations. I remember another content creator at SCG, now Coach SCG, who essentially was talking about when there's an argument with a non-toxic person, it's about working towards a resolution. When there's an argument with a toxic person, it just gets worse essentially. And one wonders or is astonished. Their concept of how someone may act in a situation can be really blown away because one does not think that someone else would go so low, but then they just do go that low in the argument, and it's just wild to witness this.
Pathological liars fabricate stories, distort facts, and deceive effortlessly. Even when caught, they double down or shift blame, making it impossible to trust them. They lie even when there's no reason to, often rewriting history to suit their narrative and gaslighting those who try to call them out. The gaslighters make you question reality. They deny, twist, and manipulate the truth so convincingly that you begin doubting your own memories, feelings, and sanity. They use subtle psychological tactics to break down your confidence, making you feel like you're the problem when, in reality, they are the ones distorting the truth.
I don't want to give them so much credit. I definitely do not want to give them so much credit, but at the same time, I definitely do think that there is like always doubling down, for example. Always doubling down is certainly a factor. I feel emotionally drained after watching this video 2 months ago, 45,000 views. You know, the narcissist actually encompasses all the other types. I like that one. Perpetual victims are often scapegoats who simply cannot get any cooperation in life. The lifetime anger generated by this also often leads to separation. And then, yeah, a few other ones there. And I would be very curious to see what signs of an emotionally immature person. Just wanted to see. And no, I'm not going to be going on a crash course. There we go. Just wanted to see
If
what
you're
this
a man,
video may have had to say. They can't stand to see others happy. They always find some way to tear it down. Yeah, and that sounds like the competitor, essentially. I find myself thinking of the old red or green quote: "You're only young once, but you can be immature at any age." I love it. Emotional immaturity is one of the bedrocks of narcissism. I'll give that. Social media has made this problem worse. Now, so many people think that they live in their own reality TV show online, and that everyone is amazed by their every move and thought. And I could imagine so on and so forth. So yeah, definitely, this is going to
then
be
you've
about
probably heard multiple versions of the following sayings throughout your entire life. Man,
Aging is biological, but growth
So I
is a
just like
narrative of
to
themselves.
make it look as though the video has been completed, but that's essentially what it is that I have for us today. So definitely be sure to take a look at the channel, of course. It Be What It Be podcast, and there are the different socials as well. I'm working on getting more shorts as well. I have an idea for that. And ideally, I am able to get a short out tomorrow, but going to try to cut this one shorter as much as I can. And so, with that being said, thank you very much for taking a look at this video. Some people, it's so disappointing to realize that this is their character. And I really don't like their character. That some of these people, they end up being people who get a relationship because what's rewarded is kind of silly in a way. And they're willing to, people who are just in general willing to cheat are going to get ahead, right? And they cheat in a way that's socially acceptable. Lying is socially acceptable. Cheating in and of itself is socially acceptable. Lie to get into someone else's pants, lie to two people are coming out of a conversation, one person saying it's all their fault, the other person is saying that, oh, we were both at fault, and then who gets believed, right? And people in general want this, which I think is extremely silly, but what could I say? It be what it be. It's the name of the podcast. Take it easy.